Welcome back to Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. I am your host, Angie Grant, and I am so excited to bring to you another beautiful guest. I bring to you Kathy, who I met. We actually met because of a mutual friend who had recently recorded on this same podcast. So, Kathy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you having me on today.
Absolutely. So, I want to just jump right in. Kathy and I were chatting a little bit before we started recording, and I said we need to stop chatting and start recording because just so much in common with Kathy and I and our beliefs about how to help, yeah, help people heal. So, yeah, let's just dig right in. Kathy, I would love for you to share a little bit about what led you here today, a little, about your story.
Okay. So I'm a writer and I'm a mom and I'm somebody who loves encouraging people on their healing journey. I care a lot about self-awareness and the work of becoming a better person. That's been like the theme of my life. Um, and I love cooking for my family, drinking coffee. And this is an interesting little tidbit. I love so much that I'm actually a wedding officiant too. So I
Oh,
didn't, I didn't tell you that, but I
no.
can marry people. I can marry people. But no, I was listening to the podcast when you had Michelle on, and something that you said about love not being enough sometimes, and I caught the some of your story about adopting, being an adoptive mom, and I that resonated with me because when I married, my husband had two boys from his previous marriage. And, my heart just went out to those boys so much. And, I had that sense of wanting to protect them. They were like 3 and 1 when we got married. And those boys were just, they were so adorable, but their mom was just, I mean, the stuff that I witnessed with their mom was just heartbreaking. And it's like right off the bat, I am, 23 years old, and I was a wreck myself, but I didn't know it. I thought I was doing a good thing by trying to take these boys in and love them and try to give them, a good life. Well, my husband was working all the time, and so those boys, like I said, I mean, I kind of took over picking them up for visitation and bringing them every other weekend and things like that. And their mom was just so checked out. And, she had DHS, a lady from DHS lived in her apartment and actually called and filed a complaint on her for letting those boys be outside alone at 3 and 1 year old and things like that. And just horrible things. And one thing in particular was when they got a little bit older, um, she left them home alone while her and her new boyfriend went to the casinos one weekend. And those boys, they got into pornography. And, I think at that time they might have been 4 and 6 or something like that. And it was just heartbreaking, and it was so out of my control. But we tried to get them. We tried to file papers to get those boys, and it was just an endless battle, But so many things happened, and my heart was just broken over those boys. But anyway, when you said that sometimes love is not enough, I felt that, I mean, I love them, but I don't know that I had the tools to really give them what they needed, or I didn't even understand fully what they needed other than they needed to be protected, you know.
Mm. Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know, and and also, excuse me, sexual just the predatory things that are going on in this world right now is horrifying. I mean, every time you turn around, there's, on TV, there's people being caught with child pornography or whatever. And, I think that's probably the number one problem in this country right now. What adults can you really trust? You know?
Yeah. So I agree. I mean, I think that there's so much chaos just happening in society in general that's impacting our kids. I would love to hear, you were saying that you felt like your experience with these boys and you felt like you were unprepared or didn't quite know how to approach things. I'd love to hear more about your experience and, what you were feeling, what you were going through. Just yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
At the time, well, I was a young mom. I mean, a young stepmom, and I had unresolved issues from my past, and I felt like I got married because it was the thing that you're supposed to do. It wasn't necessary for love, even though I cared about my husband. I cared about him deeply, and I love those boys. You know, I think it was just kind of a way for me to get out of my parents' house and just, live my own life. And we started attending a church. It was a Southern Baptist church, I mean, it was this church in our neighborhood, and it was so crazy. I grew up in a house across the street from this church, and so I was very familiar with it, but I had never attended. And so when we got married, it's like, I don't know, there was this famous preacher or something there. And so the parking lot was packed all the time. And I remember driving by that church, headed home where we lived, and I would just be so annoyed. And I'm like, what's going on at that church over there? You know, I mean, what is going on? Why are all these cars here? Well, anyway, a long story short, we started going, and I guess in my mind at that time, that was the right path. You go to church, you go to church, and that's how you serve God and you get your life right. And and not to say that, there's some good principles that you can learn at church about love or whatever, but we got involved into that church for the next 20 years. And, I feel like once I got out of that, I had to deconstruct some religious trauma from that, honestly. And, not to say that there wasn't good people, there was good people in there, but to answer your question, when we had those boys, I thought that that was the right way to help them at the time. In my young mind, I thought that was the answer. And but it's I don't know that it was the answer, honestly. And I remember feeling so anxious. I had so much anxiety, and I was worried for those boys. And I couldn't protect them when they weren't with us. And there were so many things that happened. And back then it was probably the early 90s, and they lived with their mother and her boyfriend, who eventually she married. And again, they were very young. I think, by this time they were, 4 and 6. And I got she had them both on Ritalin. She put them both on medicine, because they were boys. They were very rambunctious and just full of energy. And, I didn't agree with that. I didn't agree with medicating the boys, because they were just so young. And I just didn't think that was the answer. But, I mean, it wasn't my call. And not to say that medicine is never the answer, but just they were so young, for that. And I just felt like they needed something to channel that energy, and something, worthwhile to do and to work on, and, to kind of determine what their little gifts and shapes are on the inside. Well, anyway, so the boys were covered under my husband's medical insurance. And so we got a notice in the mail where the youngest one had been in the hospital. And, she didn't tell us about that. I mean, there was not really any good communication with her at all. And so I got that notification in the mail and I thought, what is this? When did he go to the hospital? He's 4 years old, 5 years old. What in the world was he in the hospital for? So I called the hospital, and she was the type of mother who, she had them on the Ritalin, like I said, but she was also on prescription drugs. And the bus would pick those boys up for school early in the morning. And she was the type of mom who wouldn't get up with them to make sure that they were dressed or their little lunches were packed. She stayed in the bed, and they were to get themselves ready at 5, 6, 7 years old and go to school by themselves, get on the bus. Well, so anyway, one of the youngest boy, he accidentally took her medicine instead of his Ritalin. He accidentally took some of hers and he passed out. And so he had to go to the hospital and I guess get his stomach pumped or whatever. And so I found that out because I got a notice in the mail from the insurance company where they had paid that. And I was just mortified. I mean, I was so upset that, I was thinking to myself, how can this woman have these adorable boys and not take care of them? And so I became so consumed with worry over those boys. And I had this innate feeling or thought in my mind that, you know, when a child is, the first few years of their life is sort of like wet cement, and you know it's the time to really form the foundation of their little beliefs and personality and things like that. And I just felt like time was running out, and I wasn't going to be able to help them, and that I was going to have to watch tragedy unfold, in their life. And so anyway, I stayed tore up about it all the time. I mean, I got to the point where, I had so much anxiety over it that I couldn't sleep at night. And when I did fall asleep at night, my whole body, when I would like doze off, that initial time when you doze off at night and it just feels so good, you're going to sleep. Well, I would get that feeling and I would almost be asleep. And then all of a sudden it was like my whole body went into this jerk spasm and I would wake up. And, so I couldn't even sleep. So when that happened, I would never get into another state of falling asleep. And so this went on for weeks and months and years, with these boys. And, finally I just felt like I was losing my mind, because I felt so alone in that, and I felt like I couldn't help them, even though I was seeking, I was asking people, I was asking leaders at that church, how to help. And I was talking to counselors on how to help, what can I do? And there was nothing that seemed like it was a good answer, you know?
Yeah.
And then I got pregnant with our first child, and there was a time when the boys were visiting with us, and it seemed like their mother was just so, she was just so vengeful. And they were these, like I said, these boys were just rough and tumble boys, they had bruises and scratches on them all the time. Well, so they had gone to a playground when they were with us before going back home one Sunday. And I guess later in the week, she saw some bruises on their legs or something, but it was just from them playing, in a playground.
Yeah.
Well, she took that and she accused us of abusing those boys, physically abusing those boys. And so the courts got involved and we got those boys, we lost visitation for almost a year and had to go to court, had to go to all these therapy sessions. And when we went to the therapy sessions, the therapist her actual written report to the judge was that the problems that she observed was with the mother and not with the stepmother. So that turned out to be, in our favor. But anyway, it just we didn't see them for so long, and it was just one tragedy after another with those boys. And I can't, it was just so much. And I think later on, she ended up, I can't remember how old they were. She ended up just dropping them at our house one day and said, "Here they are." And so for a period of time, they did live with us. And by that time, I had two daughters, that were younger, and then I was pregnant with our third child. And so it was just a lot of chaos in the home. But
Mhm.
I mean, and just even my own mother, it does truly take a village to raise children. But my mother, she just, like I said, earlier when we were talking, she comes from that generation that they're kind of harsh and they don't really talk about things. And there was a distinct difference in the way she treated my girls and the way she treated those boys. And it made it so hard for me. And I felt like I didn't have the support, from my family. And I needed it. I needed it so bad because these boys needed so much. And oh my goodness, I mean, I think so many other tragic things happened, and they ended up, I think, back with her by the time they were, teenagers. And it's things that I'm mortified that happened in their life, and I grieve over it today. And I mean, I can weep over those boys. And I feel so bad because I saw how precious their life was, but I couldn't do anything about it, even
Yeah.
though I wanted to. I tried, and I failed. I failed them, and in so many ways. And then also, it ended up affecting my children in some negative ways. So it's definitely parenting is very serious. And, I went into parenting thinking that I was equipped, or thinking that I had the tools necessary to and I had all the love, but like you say, love is not always enough. And in this case, it was not. Love was not enough.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, Kathy. There's so much about your story that is so relatable to myself, and I'm sure to people that are listening, between like um that co-parenting. That's a
Hmm.
nice word for it, right? Because
Yeah,
oftentimes, or many times for many of us, it can feel like one party is doing all the parenting and the other is just creating more chaos and trauma for our kids. That part is so relatable. And as you described, you didn't use this word, but you described the physical experience you were having in your body
yeah,
while you were worrying about what seemed to be the inevitable of what's going to be the next horrific thing that happens to your boys, and the sadness and the grief that you felt, and holding that all in your body.
yeah, yeah,
And to your point too, like that, like uh how that sometimes love isn't enough. And as you and I were chatting right before we started recording, I think I said it in such a more pointed way than I ever have before, but sometimes love isn't enough because we we have so much inner healing to do. And that is the key, right? Like, as parents, we are equipped to love the heck out of our kids. But when we
yeah,
go into that relationship, you and I were chatting about this, but when we go into that relationship and our own sense of lovability isn't solid, we have a wet foundation. I love that analogy, right? Like,
yeah,
if our cement is still wet and we don't have a solid foundation of our own sense of how we give and receive love, it we can't hold that house up for our kids either.
Right. That's
Oh my
exactly
goodness.
right. That's exactly right. And, you know, you just never know how life is going to twist and turn. I mean, I think, as I said, I married not necessarily for love, even though I deeply cared for my husband, we just didn't have that, we just I think we were just doing it because that's what you do. That's what people do. When you're in your 20s, you get married. And I wanted kids, I did want kids. I love kids. And the last child that I was pregnant with, he was a son. He was my son. And we've had just unspeakable trauma, girl. I mean, I was pregnant with him, and when I was about 20 weeks pregnant, back then is when I had my first ultrasound, and the doctor came in, and he sat a box of Kleenex on the table in front of me, and I'm like, hmm. And evidently, he thinks that I'm going to be crying for this news I'm about to hear. And he told me that there were some defects in my son's heart, and that there were problems in the development of his heart. And it didn't penetrate, because I'm like, I'm 20 weeks pregnant. He still has 20 weeks to go. I mean, he's not finished. I didn't grasp, what this doctor was saying. And so, I just didn't even let it really bother me at that time. Well, so a few more weeks went by, and then my father, now we actually, I didn't tell you this part. We lived across the street from my parents. Okay. We had bought a house across the street from my parents, which probably should have never done, but that's what it was. And so and my parents, they didn't have a loving relationship. They didn't know how to model love. And I don't say this to blame them. I think they did the best they could with what knowledge they had, But so while I was pregnant, my dad died suddenly in his sleep. He just suddenly died in his sleep before I had my son. And that was a sad event. But again, no tears from Kathy. And I think I had mentioned this to you in my little intro audio that I sent you. Um, this began to really be a wake up call for me about what's wrong with me. Why can't I cry? Why am I not in touch with my emotions? And the thing I mentioned to you in the audio was a flashback to when I was probably 10 or 11 years old, and those hostages in Iran were on TV every single day, morning and night. And I kept up for over a year, and I kept seeing that, and my parents had that TV on every morning before school, and I'm looking at that, and I'm like, what's the big deal? I mean, what's the big deal, But by that time, I should have had some empathy in my life. I should have been like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. These people are parents, or siblings, or adult children of people. I should have had something in me, but I didn't. And so that was a red flag to me that something major is wrong with me, that I can't cry, I can't access my emotions. And so, fast forward back to this, when my son, I was told that, he had major problems, and then my dad died. And so, but I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to fix myself, but clearly the only emotion that I could access was anger. Oh, I could get angry, and I could demonstrate a hissy fit like no other, but I couldn't access those tender emotions, and I didn't like that about myself, but I didn't know how to fix it. And so, I went on for years, trying to figure that out. But my son was born, And there was a multitude of problems, oh my gosh, it was way more than the doctor originally thought. And he ended up having to have a trach and a feeding tube because he couldn't swallow. And, you know, they called it charge syndrome, which is like an acronym for different problems. And you know, that was so overwhelming. I didn't even know that people endured something like this. I mean, it was so exhausting. And again, I did not have the family support that I felt like I needed, I mean, and that was hard. I mean, that's such a hard place in life, and it just seemed to never let up for years, the intensity. And you know I think I think some of the people at church, we did have some friends at the church and they did try to help. And I think somebody set up a fund for us, which was very, very nice. They set up a fund where there was money put in a bank or something where I could actually use that money to pay for someone to come and stay with our son at night so that we could sleep because he needed 24-hour care, and it was something beyond what I could do. And so the boys, I think they were with us for a time during all of that. And then I think the county nurse or something came, because it was reported, that he had oxygen. And so I guess the county knew about, this special needs child, whatever. The nurse came to visit, and she saw what I was going through, and she was like, Kathy, you can't do this. You can't do this by yourself. I mean, she said, we have, facilities for children like this, I mean, because you've got four other kids in this house. And I was like, oh no, I could never get rid of my son. No, I can't do that. Well, anyway, time went on, and it got to the point where I had to. I went down to a facility down in Mississippi, several hours south of where we lived. And I visited the nurses and the doctors there. And so we ended up making the decision to put our son down there. And it was so hard. I mean, but you know, he got the care that he needed. I mean, he got the 24-hour care that he needed. And I never thought that he would spend his life down there, but he's still there. I mean, to this day. But he's good now. I mean, he can't speak, but he has an iPad and we communicate every day. He can text. And he's got a very fiery, bossy personality. And he just visited a couple of weeks ago, and he calls the shots when he's here. But that was so hard too. I mean, that was just an additional element to everything else that we were, struggling with. But unfortunately, those boys, my husband's boys, we lost touch with them when they were teenagers. And my husband, we ended up divorcing, after 20 years. And, I had been a stay-at-home mom that whole entire time. So when he left, couldn't get a job. I could not even get a job. And I thought, man, everything had changed. And, it's like you had to apply with a recruiter, and the recruiter would file through all of these resumes, whatever. And I thought, I just need to bypass that. If I could get in front of somebody, I could talk them into hiring me. But that wasn't the way it is,
Yeah.
And so life was a struggle. And then, it was at a time when my girls were approaching graduating high school. And, I just made a royal ass of myself many times because again, I was afraid of what my girls might get involved with. And I was afraid for them. And I just feel like everything happened so fast and they grew up and then, you know, here I am, I'm going to have to go back to work after being at home all those years. And I don't know, it just felt like, but oh my goodness, life was just, it was just a series of unfortunate events. Actually, I have lived that. And I mean, now I feel like I have learned and I have healed because, I've had some space, to kind of get through a lot of that. But oh my gosh, you just never know what life is going to throw at you.
Yeah. Yeah, you really don't. And before we got on here, I was kind of going through your human design chart. You're a novice, right? Brand spanking new.
But yeah,
And I if you don't mind me sharing just one
go
little
ahead.
thing about your chart, but I,
Yeah.
I didn't you and I had a little email chat before we met today. And when I looked at your chart before you and I started talking, and I said, basically like you're on this planet to learn about lovability, about your own sense of lovability, about how you give and receive love and what unconditional love looks like to you. And just your reaction about like, yep, that's what I am here to do. That's what my entire life has been about is lesson after lesson after lesson after lesson. And you said, I think I figured it out. I'm like, that's not how this works. You're going to be learning about it for the rest of your life. But, having that tool of um, like somebody showing you like, hey, I don't want to be the like, this all happened for a reason, but it is part of your lesson plan. And once you know that, and like me understanding that I'm here to break cycles of trauma, that's what my lesson plan is all about. And, prior to that, it was this like, oh my gosh, like I can't handle anymore.
Mm,
But knowing that
mm,
now, it's almost like, yeah, bring it on. I'm ready to learn more. I'm ready to
yeah,
figure out more, to serve more, to help other people to not suffer the way that I have.
exactly.
So it gives us that gift of saying like to stop being stuck in that like, oh, why does this keep happening to me, and being like, oh dang, here comes another one. That's how I feel about it. And not that it isn't hard, right? Like, life continues to throw a lot of
Yeah.
mud. But I have the power now in me to choose how I respond to it instead of
Yes.
reacting to it.
Yes. Yes. That's exactly right. That's so important because I think all of those highlights of years that I just told you, I was in that mindset of I was reacting. I was reacting. And when you live in that constant state of reacting, it's like you get knocked to the ground and you get up. And as soon as you get up, you get knocked to the ground again. And then you get up and you get knocked to the ground again. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting. But once you kind of get to the other side of that and kind of learn a little bit about what your purpose is, you don't have to react. Exactly right. And when you're not in that place of reacting, then you can, just like you said, you can go, okay, I'm ready. What
Mhm.
can I learn through this? It's just the difference is night and day in your heart.
Yeah.
And I will have to say this too. I did go through after the divorce and I had another relationship and I went through a period, I guess you could call it a dark night of the soul for sure. And I was broken. I was utterly broken probably for 4 or 5 years, and I wept. I wept. I cried when I got up in the morning. I cried on my way to work. I cried when I got home. I cried when I went to bed. I was crying, but it felt so good because I had so much anger for so many years. And to be able to cry, it was amazing. But now I'm in touch with all of my emotions. And I love that because I can watch something on TV or the news. And if I was to see the Iran hostages today, I would weep over that, you know? And so, yes, I have healed a great degree, but like we said, I'm sure there's many more unlocked doors and levels,
Yeah.
to learn, and
Yeah.
I'm here for it, I mean, because the more that you personally experience love and the more you can give love, it's just so amazing when you have that love flowing through you. There's nothing like it. I mean, there's nothing like it. It feels so good. It truly feels so good. And I love that.
Yeah. Uh, I, I just, I'm so grateful that you've shared your story with, with me, with the listeners, because I think that there's so much power in it, right? Because life does happen to us and we can get stuck in our head about
Yeah,
worrying about things we have no control over.
exactly.
And we lose sight with what our gut is telling us.
Oh,
You had shared several examples about
yeah.
supporting your boys. I need to pause for a second because my cat is relentlessly trying to open the door to get out and she
Okay.
won't stop until I let her out. So hold,
Okay.
please.
Okay. Please hold.
This might be one of the times that I edit my podcast, huh? Funny.
That's funny.
Anyways, um,
That's funny.
yeah, she can open the doors too, which we got new like straight knobs and she can't open them and it drives her crazy because she used to be able to open the doors and then we
Oh,
decided to redecorate and we changed out the knobs and so she's relentless in trying to figure it out. But we changed them like 2 years ago and she still hasn't figured it out. So I think it makes her mad that we like
oh,
outsmarted the cat. I don't know.
oh my gosh. That's
Too funny.
funny.
Too funny. So, anyways, so sorry about that because this has
That's
been such
okay.
a beautiful discussion. But I do think I want to wrap up here. Unless there's anything else that you really want to make sure that you share as part of your story, as part of your healing. Is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners?
Well, yeah, I mean, just a couple of things, to touch on. I think, like we said about the like human trafficking and the predatory stuff for against kids. I think it's huge in America, and it's nauseating that we have such a major problem with that. But not only that, I think family estrangement is a big problem. People don't really know how to resolve conflict. And, it's a skill that you have to learn. It's a life skill that you need to learn. But I think too many people, just kind of let that go and years can go by.
Yeah.
Years can go by and that's happened to me. I mean, it's happened to me with my mother, my brother, I mean, we haven't really been a part of each other's lives for years. But you can't make people come to the table, and you have to find a place of peace with that, and you got to just be able to move on. But I think those are two huge things. And so anyway, I did want to just mention a little book that I've written, and
Yeah.
it's coming out soon, and I'm so excited about it. It's in honor of my first grandbaby, and it's called A Womb with a View. A Womb with a View.
I
And
love that.
so it's kind of like a Seuss type book almost, where I have renamed the different body parts and things like that, because it's just a subtle way to lay some foundational things about reproduction and the body. And just, I think that needs to be sprinkled in a child's life, as a way to lay a foundation. And if you're doing that consistently as a parent, then maybe by the time they reach puberty, they will have developed their own identity about how precious that is.
Mhm.
And and they will be able to recognize when something is not good for them, so
Yeah.
I love that. It's going to be a series. And so anyway, that's one thing coming up. But here's the last thing I did want to say is this would probably be the theme of my life, and it's that it doesn't matter where you came from or what your family of origin is, but when you become aware, when you become an adult, just say after graduating high school or whatever, you can take responsibility for your life and you can love yourself if that's what you need to do, if you didn't get what you needed, and you can make your wildest dreams come true. You can do whatever you want to do in life, and you don't have to be a victim to the past. You don't have
Hmm.
to be tied to, what you didn't get from your parents, or, you don't have to live in that state of a victim mentality. You can take charge of your life at any point in time. And I wish somebody had said that to me because I didn't know that I had the autonomy, is that the word? Autonomy to do that, and I spent the majority of my life kind of with that codependent mindset and a victim mentality. And I feel like I wasted so many years. So past doesn't have to define you. You can be whatever you want to be, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Oh, that's so perfect. And I can't remember if you said this while we were recording or beforehand, but and you don't have to conform to what your parents did or what
Oh,
you think you're supposed to do, or
right.
to conform to that concept of like you must get married and have kids out of high school. I think that
Exactly.
that is fading away, but you're 100% right. I think when I learned as an adult, I mean, in the past few years about full responsibility, it was the most freeing thing I have ever learned. That
Yeah,
living in that victim state, you really are victim to how you think other people think and feel about you, how you think you're supposed to behave, how you think you're supposed to live your life. It is very much a prison that we put ourselves in unknowingly because we're taught to, but that
exactly.
freedom that comes with really accepting full responsibility for your happiness it's wild.
That's right.
Oh,
Find out what makes you tick and then create a beautiful life for yourself, you know?
yeah. Oh, that was beautiful. I always say like share one practical piece of advice. So if you have something else, of course share that, but I love that, right? That concept of you get to choose where you take your life. I
Yeah,
think that's
that's right.
amazing. Yeah.
And I think just remember that, healing is an inside job.
Hmm.
Nobody's going to do it for you. Nobody's going to do the work. You just, again, it's just to echo that. You have to pick it up and do the work yourself and become self-aware and kind of learn what it is that, makes you tick, like the design. Is it the human design?
Yeah.
Is that the
Yeah.
name? Yeah. I mean, just kind of figure out what that is and then perfect that. And you can be happy in this life. You
Mhm.
can be happy and fulfilled. And I mean, for me, finding out that I'm a writer, oh my gosh, I mean, I just really realized that in the past couple of years. I'm a writer. And so I mean, I quit my job to do this. and
Yeah.
and so it just so happened that everything worked out to where I'm able to do this full time. And I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful. I have got so many things in my mind planned for next year. And so, but by the end of this year, I should have a total of 4 books out. And so I'm just very excited about that.
Yeah. Oh, so exciting. So, where can listeners find you, Kathy, so that they can stay in touch with the book progress and be ready for the launch? Where can they find you?
So I'm on Facebook right now, so it's just Kathy Bailey, and then I'm on TikTok and Instagram under author underscore Kathy D Bailey, and so I'll have a lot of information coming out there, and yeah, I would love it if you would follow me, and I'm not super consistent on social media, but I'm trying. When you're writing, you can't post on social media, you
Yeah,
know.
I know, right? I know. Oh my goodness, Kathy. Well, I am so grateful that you joined. Sometimes love isn't enough today. I hope that listeners go find you, follow you, do all the things. And thank you so much for trusting me to share your story here.
Angie, thank you so much for having me. I mean, I really enjoyed our conversation and I appreciate it. Would love to catch up again soon sometime.
Perfect. All right. Take care.
You too.